Everybody, the petrolheads of Britain have an annual ritual, which is that the moment the sun first appears in the year, we begin seeking out a convertible for the summer on Auto Trader. And these reviews are some of my absolute favourites, because the fact is, with a convertible, the car doesn't actually always have to be that good or that expensive for you to still have a very good time. But on occasion, you do feel like spending a little bit more. And today, I'm not asking the $1 million question, instead, the slightly more relevant £70,000 one. Because for that sum, you could have yourself a brand new Boxster, which wouldn't even have 6 cylinders. Or you could have this, one of Ferrari's greatest and most important road cars of all time. This is the F430 Spider. I do not believe it is any exaggeration whatsoever to say that this is one of the most important cars in the history of the mid-engine Ferrari. But unfortunately for the F430, the 458 Italia was such a huge step on, it was almost immediately forgotten. And that is a shame, because it deserves a huge amount of credit. Between this and the 360 that preceded it, they revolutionized the Ferrari and brought it really into the modern age, certainly for the entry-level line. For the V12s, this job was done by the 599 and later the F12. The 360 took the first big step by introducing an all-new and considerably more modern chassis. Where previously the likes of the 355 and the cars for the decades before had used a tubular steel construction, the 360 used an all-new aluminium one, built by Alcoa, and the one used in the F430 is essentially a mild evolution of that platform. But the big news for the F430 was the introduction of an all-new engine family, dubbed the F136. It displaces here 4.3 litres, from which the car gets its name, and it is a 4-valve per cylinder design, unlike the old one which had 5 valves per cylinder, and makes 490 horsepower, just shy of the then new Lamborghini Gallardo with its thunderous 5-litre V10. Despite the engine being bigger in both displacement and also physical size, it weighs just a few kilos more than the old F129, and it also brought with it a much needed boost in torque. The old 360 made something like 270 pound-foot, this 343. That's about 470 Newton meters. The car retained the double wishbone suspension, front and rear, and adaptive dampers as seen on the 360. In fact, many suspension components are actually interchangeable between the two. Other big news for the F430 included the arrival of the E-differential, a piece of technology lifted straight from Ferrari's Formula One cars. And remember, when this was made, they were still a winning team. And helping you control all of this car's technology was another piece lifted from F1 that today we're very familiar with, but back then was all new, and that is the little Manettino switch down here. It has 5 different settings: ice and snow, which nobody is ever going to use, wet, sport, race, and CST, or more accurately, CST off. Those essentially ramp up all the various different functions of the traction control, engine, gearbox, suspension, and the like to give you an increasingly sharper, harder, and tauter driving experience. Speaking of which, with the F430 you of course had the Spider variant and later a more hardcore Scuderia, of which I'm very proud to say I own an example. The Spider is a car that is particularly interesting because it was one of the first times that Ferrari said there was essentially no difference in performance between it and the coupe. And though there is certainly a little bit of scuttle shake, you do notice it in the F430 more than a 360 Spider because it's just a little bit firmer set up. It is nowhere near as bad as in the F8 Spider. That was criminal, really, for a car that cost so much and is vastly newer and technologically superior to this. So we know that it's just as quick as a coupe, but can you have as much fun? Let's find out. I really like this car, by which I mean not just the F430, but this Spider specifically. It has been brought to me by a lovely chap called Paul, who as a young apprentice saw his boss's F512M and thought, that is cool. One day I shall have a Ferrari of my own. Happily, a few years ago, he managed to make it a reality and bought this. And I've got to say, I think it's a fantastic way to introduce yourself to not just Ferrari ownership, but supercar ownership as well. You see, the F430 and the 360 before it weren't just a step forward in terms of performance and technology, but also in the way the company saw their cars. They wanted people to be able to use them more, so they made sure they were ever more practical, ever more reliable. And here in particular, the F430, it's really paid off. You notice it in both the big and the small things. For example, in a 360, to open the boot, you have to turn the ignition on and then lift a little cover in the middle, press a button, and you'll finally get access to it. In this, meanwhile, it's down here in a small row of toggle switches, which means that you can access it easily, even if you're outside the car. Though here, you do need the ignition on, and in the Scuderia, you don't. They were always learning. This car also, I'm sure you've noticed, was equipped with the F1 paddle shift gearbox, which Ferrari had been peddling for a decade before this one was built. And I actually drove an example of the first car in the world to have such a gearbox, the 355 F1, only a week ago. Though it's a system that does have some charms, there is no real nice way to put it. It's old, it's antiquated, and it just isn't that great. However, by the time the F430 rolled around, they had really improved it. And just as well, because for this, some 80–90% of buyers spec'd the F1 box, in spite of the fact it was a £6,000 option back in the day. If you wanted a Spider, that I think was about another £8,000, and if you wanted the carbon ceramics that this car does not have, that was £10,000. On the subject of those, I was speaking to Paul about them earlier, and he has toiled with the idea of perhaps putting them on the car, but it's not just a simple case of putting new discs and pads on, there is a software element to it as well, and the fact is, a lot of people are scared off by things like ceramics because we've all been told how expensive they are if they need replacement. And to be honest, at normal road speeds, even when having a little bit of fun, these steels should just about cover you. For the track day enthusiast, I would say the ceramics are worth having, but you're not going to take a car like this on the track, are you? It has just 16,000 miles on the clock, and I have to say it has been kept in amazing condition. It is a really clean and tidy example. Options that were on this car include the upgraded Ferrari sound system, which gives you the little sort of bass bin in the middle here. You've also got the seats with Daytona stripes in red that I kind of like, although they do look a little bit tarty. A little bit. You've also got windshields, and there's a Scuderia style grille at the back. It is always interesting driving a car which is very similar to one you own, in this case the F430 versus Scuderia, and it means you pick up on relatively small things, like the fact that my car has carbon shifters and this one aluminium. Oh, you didn't get lift on these, it wasn't even an option. Now, speaking of the shifters, I think I actually prefer these aluminium ones. They feel proper, they've got a nice heft to them, and though they're a little on the small side, I really like them. These F1 boxes, I think, get a bad rap because a lot of people don't quite understand how they work. There's a few things you need to know. At lower speeds, lift off a little to help smooth out the shift. This you probably do know. At higher speeds, particularly over 5,000 RPM and with your foot more than halfway down, do not lift. You'll get the quickest shifts. And the one thing a lot of people don't realize, you can heel and toe with this as well. let me show you. I'm going to put the car into race mode now, because I'm brave. And this is a 5th to 4th downshift with no help. Okay, 4th to 3rd. All right, that's not a bad shift. Nice, smooth, well actuated. Now I'm going to do the same, but I'm just going to blip the throttle a little bit, exactly as I would were this a manual car. Here we go. Here we go. Even with your foot all the way down and at higher RPM, the shifts here will never be quite as quick as in the Scuderia. In 2008, just after this car was made, they did revise the software and hardware in the regular F430 and improved it, though I haven't driven one to be able to tell you just how much of a difference it actually made. Of course, I prefer the classic 6-speed gated shifter, and one thing that to me makes the F430 noteworthy is the fact this was the last mid-engined V8 Ferrari where you could get one. I have previously erroneously said it was the last Ferrari where you could get one, but that's not true. You could have it in a 599 and you could also have it in a California. And I have actually seen a California right-hand drive with a manual. That is rare. Really rare. If you're coming at this from the perspective of a modern-day Ferrari owner, there will actually be quite a few things that take you by surprise. In no particular order, they include the fact that I'm pretty darn certain the leather in these cars was just a bit better. It's nicer, it's more tactile, it's softer. This feels so plush. It's also really, really well damped. But, unfortunately, one thing you don't have is a bumpy road mode button. That was an innovation of the 430 Scuderia, and it means that when you put the car into race mode, the dampers also get firmer. This is unfortunate, but in all honesty, not quite the deal breaker you might imagine. It's still supple enough that it's not an issue. The exhaust, in case you're wondering, is absolutely standard, as is the rest of the car. And it's a lot more raucous than I thought it would be. With the roof down, you get a lot more of that noise, and though I've never felt like these sounded anywhere near as good as the old 360, it's still not bad. And there's a lot of crackles and gargles and all sorts of things going on in here that I just didn't expect. So filled with character, this car. The steering also, modern day Ferraris, very, very quick steering. This, not so much. It's still agile, it's still darty as and when you want it to be, but it's a little bit slower, it's a little bit more relaxed. Lotus Evora owners will be familiar with this steering, and those who know my videos will also know that I do moan about Ferrari's wild inconsistency when it comes to getting steering right. Happily, in the F430, they have. And this is curious because I've driven a number of these cars now in various different guises, coupe, spider, newer, older, and all that jazz. And this is definitely one of the better. This is up there with the Scuderia. It's not quite as good, and the Scuderia has hardware changes to support that, but it's got weighting, it's got feel. The car talks to you. This is presently on a set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4S. The previous owner still had the original tyres on the rear, believe it or not. Yeah, don't know why those were changed and not the fronts, maybe a puncture or something, but if you are going to buy a Ferrari, or even just drive one, do yourself a favour, check the age of the tyres. I don't know what it is about Ferrari owners, but they're allergic to putting new rubber on their cars. This now grips and goes absolutely fabulously. Tyres actually can even be responsible for the suspension feeling a little overly harsh. It is possible, it does happen. I have experienced it myself. At about 3,000 RPM, you get this real change in the character of the car. Various things happen, the whole nature of the engine changes, and it just surges forward with a real gusto. If you were to get into this from a 355, it genuinely feels like a car from 2 decades later. It's a lot quicker. I love the 355 to pieces, don't get me wrong, but quick, it's not. Well, not by modern standards. This is still pretty good. The Spider, of course, has a bit of a penalty in terms of weight. It weighs about 1,600 kilos, the regular coupe more like 1,500, and a Scuderia about 1,400. In spite of this car carrying 200 kilos more than what I'm used to, it's not getting in the way of my enjoyment whatsoever. And the gentleman who's just gone past in the RS6 has reminded me of another thing I love about these. They're perfectly sized for British roads. You've got a great view out the front with those lovely and shapely haunches, excellent visibility, of course, with the roof down, and roof up, the car's very well insulated, very nice, easy to deal with. And it's not too wide. It's a big car, don't get me wrong, but not daunting. Turning circle, I mean, it's a Ferrari, do you really care? But, come on. It's a bit slow with things like that, getting into reverse, but you get used to it. And getting into first, apparently. Come on. I do not want to hold up the man in the van. Let's go. I mean, honestly, with the Scuderia, I generally wind up changing at like 5 and a bit thousand RPM as soon as you get that quick change. With this, all I do to compensate for the extra weight, just let it rev a bit longer. Does the job. Let's be serious here. You know as well as I do, these are not going to be super cheap cars to maintain. I would recommend buy them from a dealer, either Ferrari main or simply reputable specialist. Get a warranty of some description. Later ones you can actually still get a genuine Ferrari warranty. They'll warrant the cars up to 15 years, essentially for the engine and gearbox, but they're the bits you're worried about, aren't they? And servicing is not horrendous. It's cheaper than even the 360 because the cars didn't have a cam belt of any description. So your regular service, 700 to 1,200 pounds, something like that. Less if you want to go to an independent, but I really don't think you need to. Of course, they're well known for some big issues. The precats in the manifolds, they can disintegrate and the engine can eat them, and that's very, very bad. The ball joints, they're famous for it. They're voracious. They love nibbling them for fun. 360s, exactly the same. I've struggled with them on my 430 Scuderia, but they can be fixed. They're not horrendously expensive. The sign for those is a knocking noise at certain speeds, often lower ones. And of course, things can leak, stuff can go wrong. You might suddenly find yourself facing a £2,000 or £3,000 bill. I get that. Not everybody is going to be willing to be prepared for that kind of thing. But £70,000 just about gets you into a Boxster 4-cylinder one. £73,000 or thereabouts gets you into a Boxster GTS 4 litre, which is, I think, much more palatable. But remember, that's £73,000 with no options. Porsche aren't terrible, so it's going to be, call it 80 grand. But really, these start at 70 essentially for one you might consider buying, all the way up to 120 for manual examples with low miles, and maybe a bit more for optimistic dealers. I'm ignoring the Scuderia here, it's a separate car, and I'm definitely ignoring the 16M, because if I'm going to try and make an argument for this car on value for money, the 16M is not the way to do it. The chassis in this really impresses. It's actually very practical. Maybe not as practical as the Boxster because it only has the one boot, but it's very big. You can get a surprising amount in these, certainly compared to just about anything modern. This morning I drove a Maserati MC20, the kind of car of the moment, Evo's current car of the year. And you know what? I would much rather have been driving this. The roof down, you've got a little bit of wind in your hair, but I'm kind of tall in the torso department. You've got a little wind deflector behind you, and it does enough of a job. The heater actually works, though in these, the aircon is always better. It'll cool you much more than it'll warm you up, but it's not bad at all. Makes a fabulous noise. It's far better even than the GTS, which as a modern day car is very, very muted. The whole thing also does feel like, okay, it's a generation or two older, but it is also a class or two more special. Everything in here is gorgeous. Carbon, leather, aluminium, Alcantara, if it was spec'd with it. It's just brilliant. Fuel economy, of course, will not be great. Budget on it doing high teens as an average. But handily, Ferrari took the criticism of the old 360 when people said that was too bad on fuel. And so for this, they made the tank bigger. 95 litres. That's Italian logic. The gearbox, I know, will receive the ire of many, but honestly, it's just not getting in the way of my fun. And you're going to save about 30 or 40 grand if you're willing to live with it, which I would be. I think I could actually have one of these alongside the Scuderia and you genuinely feel like you've got two different cars. That is really how different they are. These seats are really, really comfortable, very, very nice. You didn't really get many fancy options in these cars. It was before that time. You got things like a nav system down here as an option, but I really wouldn't worry about that sort of thing. I'd instead suggest buying more on condition, provenance, service history, all that sort of good stuff. And if you want a buyer's guide on the F430, this is not that. There are loads of those out there. The good news, of course, is that this is a car that I think is fairly likely to hold its money. Not only is it a pretty good looking, although I'll admit, far from the best looking Ferrari. The F430 has always been a bit ungainly to my eyes. It's growing on me slowly, and the 360 I used to not like, but now do, and the Scuderia is wonderful, much, much better, sharpens the looks up, but I'm not going to call it ugly anymore. I also think this is an example of a car where it actually looks better as a convertible. The coupe has the lovely side profile for sure, but with the roof down specifically, which is when you're really going to drive this car, it cuts a gorgeous figure. Those buttresses behind are just magnifique. And okay, I think actually the Boxster could be a prettier car, but this is just far more special. I know a lot of people will be worried about the whole Ferrari owner bit. Ferrari owners get a bit of a bad rap, but actually, you know what? I've met some really, really lovely people who own Ferraris, including Paul, this car's owner. Great guy. And like me, he says that, you know, he was worried about what Ferrari owners would be like. He's even joined the Ferrari Owners Club, which I've yet to do because I was worried I wouldn't get on with them. But now he said they're actually quite nice people. I might have to do it. I'm a member of the Lamborghini Owners Club, don't have a Lamborghini anymore. I'm a member of the TVR Owners Club, mostly for the excellent magazine they do, Sprint, but I've never even owned a TVR. But the big thing is really, you can buy a car like this, it should be pretty durable, it should be pretty dependable. They really were focusing on making them a more usable, a more dependable car, and it paid off. They're really nice and easy to live with. Not impossibly big to park in a regular parking space, plenty of boot space, they're comfortable, you can drive them around town, no worries at all. The gearbox is a delight compared to that which came before. Visibility is superb. It's about the easiest supercar you'll ever live with. A Gallardo, first gen Gallardo, I think it sounds better and I think it looks better, but they are a pig to live with. Things go wrong all the time, bits are expensive, they're just as fragile as these, in fact, I think more so, and they don't handle. They'll never handle, no matter what you do to them. First-gen Gallardos will not go around a bend with any description of tact or grace. Full stop. This, delicate, beautiful, it's got poise. A lot of Ferraris, I'm going to put my neck out on this one, can be a bit of a disappointment, especially if you've spent 20, 30 years building them up in your head. I remember when this was announced, I remember it as being maybe one of the first times a new Ferrari was launched, and I was actively interested. I was old enough to be into cars. I was about 15 when these came out in 2004. Production ended in about 2010, 2011 as they were replaced by the 458. I printed out some pictures of it to show my guitar teacher, who was thoroughly uninterested, but I think I actually still have those prints somewhere at home. And it really took me in the car. To be able to not just drive one years later, but own one is an absolute delight. And I have experienced cars where I know people have idolized them for decades, and I do worry if ever they meet their heroes, they're going to find out they're a raging alcoholic and a bit of a bastard. But this is not going to be like that. And people, by the way, will be nice to you in these as well, because they're a little bit older, a little bit less shouty, a little bit less in your face. You can easily get one in a more subdued color if you prefer. And then, when you're done being nice and happy and smiling at the ladies going out for a jog of an evening, and you get a nice bit of clear road to yourself, you can do this. Ain't no Boxster I've ever met that does that. You might even say this could be the last of the old analogue Ferraris. The 458 is absolutely a better car if you're into measuring things. But if what appeals to you about the supercar experience is tactility, involvement, and sensation, I think this, simply put, outclasses it. Should a 458 be worth more money? Yeah, it probably should. Should it be double? No. No, it should not. These right now are in that kind of awkward phase where they're not really quite classics, nor are they new or interesting enough for people to buy them just because they're the fastest thing out there for the money. And so, that makes this the perfect time to buy one, if you're even thinking about a Boxster. I'm not saying you should have one of these instead, because it simply isn't the answer for everyone. However, I am saying you should give it a go. A huge thank you to Paul for bringing his car out, even on this far less sunny than we hoped British evening. It's been an absolute delight. And of course, as ever, a big thanks to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.